All right, so we're going to bring in our next half of the discussion on the IP and the future of the production landscape. We have three panelists for this one. John Panaman, unfortunately, because I guess a lot of people, 'tis the season, is not feeling well. So we have Bill McKechney and Scott Rothenberg and James Stellpflug. So welcome, gentlemen. So I guess we'll kind of start where we had the previous conversation. Is that me? That's weird. Okay, so let's start with Bill. From your perspective, when you look at the current production landscape for the way you design trucks and they're operating, what's kind of your sense on the state of things? Do you find it becoming more complex, simpler? Are you seeing, like I mentioned earlier, something, forest through the trees and kind of like a path through the trees?
Well, it seems to be changing every year. So we adopt the workflow to work with the changes that they bring in. And that's either through IP or baseband. We have to adapt to the changes.
Right. So as far as as far as IP from your customers and your clients, are they coming to you saying, I don't think they would come to you and say they wouldn't say, Bill, we want you guys to go all IP. They would probably give you a challenge that sounds like it's going to require IP. Is that safe to say?
Well, there's other aspects of it besides like an IP routing system. This Cigna, things of that nature. And to support IP as a secondary outlet for the truck.
Mm-hmm. So Scott, from the NEP perspective, I know you guys have done some IP. So how are you guys approaching your facility design and fundamentally and trying to make sure that they're ready for today and then also for tomorrow?
I mean, it really depends on the facility and what we're trying to accomplish. Some of them do need to be IP, some of them will not need to be IP. It really depends on the use of it. IP certainly gives you some scale, but with scale comes some complexity and all of that, so it's finding the right solution for the problem.
Right. So by scale, I guess the consistent theme we've heard the last 18 months or so is bigger shows are more IP. They can take advantage of IP technologies much more better than like an 8-camera show, if you will.
Yeah, and some of it, right now is in multi-viewers, for example. You can get a lot more pictures on a screen in an IP multi-viewer than you can in baseband. But it just depends on what you're doing. But yeah, for an 8-camera show, you don't need to do IP. For an 8-camera show where everything is on site. But if you're going to have a remote production, IP is going to add some flexibility and for that. Mm-hmm. So, it really depends on, again, what you're doing.
Right. So James, good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Ken.
James and I have to do a panel every 2 hours at any event. That's just the way it always goes.
I'm working on my gold status for the frequent flyer.
Exactly, yes. You're a 1K. So from your perspective, what are you seeing? I mean, EVS, you guys are always trying to kind of pivot and follow what your customers need. I know we heard earlier, we talked about 12 gig and sort of almost half lukewarm, but I know you guys have embraced 12 gig because there are other people who believe in 12 gig. So how are you guys responding to the marketplace? What are you hearing? What's your sense of where the business is going?
I think when you look at it, you have the lens of view that we know that a lot of our customers that came to us last year and said, in all cases, IP wasn't going to fit the bill. There's staff time to train people to make sure they could deploy and manage the infrastructure in that system. And they knew that all the tools weren't there yet to deliver and manage that IP network. So 12 gig was an ask when you're talking about building a 4K truck. So that was a short-term thing they'd asked for and something we said in many cases that makes sense. So our new servers right now are delivering with a mixed backplane because we know that the need is flexible. You may start by doing an HD production today and it's baseband SDI. You may say, I need to do 4K tomorrow, and 12 gig SDI is going to give me a nice simplicity to roll out and deploy. But I think we all tend to agree that IP is definitely the way it's going, and that's the scalability, the flexibility you're going to be able to get out of it. So that's why we put all three interfaces as an available option on those platforms. I think that as you look though at IP, when we really start to look at the scale, it's changing out the way you think about the problems. And that's where, IP has been put in place today to solve many problems previously. So that was already done in contribution circuits from the remote site back to broadcast centers. That was done at control layers, access layers to let people find more content, do more things. And now we're starting to say on the infrastructure side, when does it make sense? And I think as Jason, said on the previous panel, you're still seeing kind of some bespoke places to put it in place and use it to solve one problem. And now the hard part of this year is to say, okay, have we turned enough of the corner? Can we deploy a wider system and now start making every endpoint on that production system natively IP so we can actually leverage it for the benefit?
But what do you all see as the engineering challenge? Because I guess the problem is, when you have IP at all those endpoints, then you need people at all those endpoints who can understand how to solve a problem that may arise. And I've always heard that this is one of the intrinsic issues is, you got to be careful of overcommitting because your engineering staff, they can do a lot, but it's a big ask. So what's your sense, Bill and Scott?
There's certainly a training time, a retraining time, that knowledge base of what that is, and then just how that workload is different, and then understanding what that difference is going to be. And I think the other thing for right now is a standard, just on the fact that everybody's sort of going down similar roads, but they're similar and not the same. And that's a challenge right now. And again, getting the engineers, getting production, getting people, at our clients' facilities to sort of all agree on, what are we going to do? Because It's also got to match back what our clients are doing at home base.
Sure.
And the engineering training is very important because they're our first line out there. And when something goes wrong, they have to be able to take care of it on site.
But I think that's also one of the challenges there is that while it seems like the easy, theoretical is blame it on the fact that we got to get engineers trained, but I think a lot of the onus also comes back to us as vendors, which is that we can't make it so that all of your engineers have to become experts at command line prompts and can go in and troubleshoot a switch. So we have to bring a certain, broadcast and content creation tool set to make it easy and familiar. The discovery and registration process that the AIMS roadmap has pushed, which is to make it so I can plug things in and it discovers itself on the network. So I don't have to get into very complex long tables and ways to manually and statically map.
Well, particularly since in the IT world that you have people that program Cisco switches, you have different people that program Juniper switches, different people that do Arista, and I think of the manufacturers here, everybody here has their favorite one, and they're all not the same. So if each engineer on the truck needs to be a command line expert in all three of those, it's going to be a pretty big challenge for the industry. So I think that's also something we as an industry need to understand and sort of push our manufacturers, sorry, James, but to do that, because at the end of the day, what our clients are looking for is a more cost-effective way to do what they're doing. There's a whole business side to all of this, and that we need to make this simpler. That's what really people, I think, want out of IP is simpler and more scalable. So suddenly, if you now need, command line expertise, we're not getting that.
Well, you mentioned the Ciscos and the Junipers and sort of the commercial off-the-shelf, the COTS stuff, if you will. And I think when you go back to the promise of IP, it was all about, well, this is great, we can take advantage, we being the guys who are building the trucks and the people who are buying equipment, not necessarily the manufacturers, could take advantage of the scale of the whole IT infrastructure and buy much cheaper equipment, much cheaper routers and stuff. Now it seems like what's happened is that the manufacturers in our industry are taking advantage of that and actually using those components to build more efficient and capable products. But do you see a day when you're going to sit there and have a truck full of just all Cisco switches, or you're always going to want a broadcast mind kind of wrap around a little bit?
I don't know that I see the day. I also don't know that that's necessarily factually correct, that will actually be cheaper at the end of it, because a Cisco switch, you end up throwing that away after 3 years. How many people are still running 5-year-old EVSs and very effectively? There's a lot of broadcast technology that has a lot longer lifespan than COTS stuff does, and I think that's also something we need to keep in mind of the longevity that we're all used to in the hardware we're used to using. And it's not 18 months or 2 years as it is in the IT world.
Right.
I think cost has to be a careful thing, and I think we've said it on previous panels and discussions, which is if you're just going after using IP because it's going to be cheaper, I think you're glossing over all the other business problems, because again, it's meant to give you future flexibility. It's meant to let me say, maybe you bought some core switch last year, and this year you need something more. Well, you shift that resource to some other place and you update a core switch, or you move things to the edge and get into a much more distributed architecture, something that gets you flexibility you could have never done with a bespoke frame and box, which serves one purpose today but it's getting into the leveraging points you can get from the IT industry.
Right, right. But how do you, because I guess, let's throw this out there. You have executives within organizations who are, and chief financial officers and people who are not versed in technology, but they do know that IP technology is cheaper than they know that. So then they come to you and then you say, we're gonna go IP, and then the dollars and the cents, they say, well, this should be a lot cheaper. How come it's not a lot cheaper? So how do you get them to understand why it isn't cheaper? Because they will probably push back and say, no, it should be cheaper. You're spending too much money on this router.
Show him a quote from James. Sorry.
Thanks, Scott. But I think that's where, again, you have to paint the picture at the wider view, which is you're not looking at calendar year one, perhaps. It might be a cost savings over years. It might be a cost savings at future flexibility, and the topic that probably spawns on from the virtualization this morning is if you're buying and building infrastructure today with CapEx that was built for one production, I'm going to take a lens of view from a fixed facility. Someone may come in 9 months and say, we got this great new idea for a show, can we do it? And someone will say, yes, but we got to buy 6 more boxes over here and 3 more of those and 5 more of those. With virtualization, with IP, it gets you a layer of flexibility that, if you've thought about it correctly, you've got more resources, so that becomes a much easier thing to digest and wouldn't become later expense.
Right.
It also becomes the ability to scale. So you might take 2 smaller things that were, less expensive, and then you put them together to make something bigger, whether it's 2 smaller trucks to make a big truck or whatever that ends up being, so that the aggregate of that is actually less expensive. So it really depends on the circumstance, and it's more of a detailed conversation.
Right. So what do you? So we talked earlier. You guys were. I don't know if you were in the room. Were you in the room downstairs at the remote engineering workshop? We were talking about virtualization. But there's a potential for trucks to move to become big giant computer processors with software riding on top of it, which I guess they sort of are anyway. But no longer dedicated hardware, but sort of just a wide open platform. And then to James' point, you go from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. Are you guys concerned about sort of having to buy equipment and on a software subscription basis? I mean, I know you guys, your whole business is built around really kind of amortizing your assets. And
I'm very concerned
Yes.
about that.
Why'd you both look at me when you said that?
what is the concern? Is it just complexity again, or is it just sort of?
Well, whenever you change software, the change goes downhill.
Right.
And what I mean by that, it trickles down. So there's going to be changes all the way along the workflow. And at the end of the day, the director wants to see it, hear it, and take it. I mean, that's what they want to do. And if you stop that from happening, of course, he can't have his show.
Right.
So at that point, I say that you can't pull the trucks off the road. You can't do what you want to do to make sure that it tests thoroughly and all that stuff. So I don't think being software-based is the way to go.
Well, I guess to me, also a fundamental challenge for you guys would be, having to a truck that doesn't have a truck that can always be reassigned and reconfigured on a moment's notice means that you are always going to be reconfiguring your trucks every show. You're not able to just kind of roll up and say, this is what it is, deal with it. It's going to be sort of starting from scratch every show in a weird way.
I think to James's point, depending on how the industry grows, and certainly where we're pushing the industry, where it's more, yes, it might use that technology that you can redeploy quickly and easily, but if it's as quickly as recalling a snapshot, because at the end of the day, this device wants to be a replay device. That's what we do. We do replays, we do cameras, we do mixes, and it's a simple recall that you're going to recall X number of inputs by Y number of outputs. You're going to have Z number of operators, and it's a simple user interface that does that. That doesn't concern us, because we reconfigure the trucks every day anyway. I mean, back when Bill and I were running trucks, it was harder then in a lot of ways because you had patch cords, you had to figure a lot of stuff out. We just have to be cognizant of the fact that the truck's going to roll up with what it does, but somebody still is going to come in with some other piece of equipment from a rental house, from their home base, whatever it is that we're going to have to interface, and it's just going to be understanding the time and having standards to make sure that happens smoothly.
I mean, the EIC now spends more time reconfiguring the tape room every show for the different clients, because they all do it differently. Same thing with monitor walls and everything.
Yeah, so I think you're right. On the technical side, there's that necessity there, especially set, shoot, strike shows, the big contract shows. The truck is built once and generally stays the same for the whole season. But I think that if I reflect back at what you were asking, is the business topic, which is if we gave the flexibility, using IP, using off the shelf, and the virtualization topic, the question really is, can the business model be changed to not make as much CapEx investment up front and pay for it only when it's used on the truck side? And today that's not how the contracts are built. So there's a mismatch here, which is, could we go to that direction? Yes. Is everyone ready to adopt that? And how does that affect all the way cascading down to the business models for application of that?
Yeah, I mean, that becomes a sea change in how the business is going, and it'll be change.
Right. Yeah, but that has to be kind of widespread change, right? I mean, that's the challenge there.
And there could be a whole finance panel on, does that change actually, is it a change, and is it really OpEx or is it really CapEx? I mean, there's a whole nonsense that I don't think we want to get into.
That'll be the sports broadcasting financing.
Woohoo!
But I mean, on the other hand, there's advancements by the vendors, by the manufacturers, for specific equipment that,
Absolutely.
We have to put in.
Yeah.
And it has to be, maintained and.
And us and other vendors have been giving that for years now in various progressions on the proprietary hardware, which is ways to turn on functions. And it's already been shifting in that lens of view, but now we're talking about the next wave that's coming, where when you get into a fully software-defined mentality, you really do have to figure out how to price it differently, how to deliver it differently, and then how you bring up your production collections. So you say that I'm doing one show today. Today you think about, you said, bringing in rental gear, putting it in the rack to fill the space and fit the production need. But as we get into this off-the-shelf technology now, you're going to be able to say, I turn on what I need rather than rack and stack it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the camera side, probably one of the best things for this whole UHD, HDR environment is the fact that cameras can be switchable, right? You're not having to invest in taking a risk of buying 40 dedicated UHD cameras and hoping against hope that you can find someone who wants to use them.
That part has been addressed very well. So the cameras of today, and I'll just say it right out, Sony has done a great job on that.
So what's your take on, we didn't talk about it too much on the previous half hour, the HDR, which is the big buzz. Because you hear the 4K, then HDR came out of nowhere and everyone's like, ooh, I like HDR. 4K is okay, but with HDR, 4K is great. And we're going to have a demonstration from the NBC Olympics. They're letting us use their demo material outside, so we will have a 4K HDR demo. But what's your take on HDR and UHD? I mean, and I know you guys respond to what your clients ask for, but what's your sense on being ready for these demands for UHD and HDR?
Well, UHD we're already looking into, and hopefully we'll get a workflow that'll work for both UHD and all the other standards that we have to supply out of the mobile unit. That's the trick of being able to do that. Technology's marching on, as we say, and hopefully very soon, it won't be a hurdle. It'll be just part of what package we provide. Rather than having a single truck that can only do UHD, it will encompass everything.
Personally, I like 1080p, HDR, wide color gamut. I think does a lot more to show something that the viewer is going to visually see more than 4K. You don't have the storage penalties, the bandwidth penalties associated with it, and I think that's much more compelling without a lot of the costs and in time and money.
I think it boils down to perceptibility.
Yeah.
And like we've kind of proven out there is that, well, UHD and 4K, when you just talk about, the last couple of years was a resolution discussion. And most people have generally gotten to the point of saying resolution by itself doesn't seem to get you there. But when you combine it with the wide color space, when you combine it with the full HDR, now you start seeing something that's perceptible all the way down the food chain. But there's still hurdles to overcome. So I think that whether it's a topic of UHD 4K with HDR applied or the 1080p topic, I think I agree that there's the overall assessment there that if someone saw two screens and one was 1080p with HDR, another was 4K with HDR, I don't think the average person could pick off the difference or tell.
So when you watch this demo, which will be located at the top of the stairs out here, the production that they did at the Olympics, and we'll talk about this a little bit, I guess a little bit later, obviously, it was a mix of 4K cameras that they had and then 1080i cameras that were up-converted. And the wonder that, when we were watching this, I was watching with Dave Mazza, who unfortunately is in Spain at OBS right now, down in Rio, and what he loved about it was that it definitely let you understand that 1080i up-converted looks like garbage.
Right.
And that, if we're going to do up-converted 1080p, because it's important that the executives see a really lousy picture, so they say, that's not good. Why does it look so bad? And you can say, because it's 1080i, not 1080p. So, I mean, but we heard Jason mention, from GameCube's perspective, he's like, 1080p, I don't know. Maybe we're going to go all in for 4K. So how do we, we obviously need 1080p wireless cameras, but how do you see 1080p, 4K kind of emerging or not emerging, or Scott? Put you on the spot.
I guess not emerging. There seems to be some passive interest in 4K for certain things. And I think right now, 1080p, it's the speed at which transfers happen, it's drive size, it's all of those things. And I think when we saw from 1080i to 1080p and people suddenly had half the amount of storage or half the speed, whether it was on the SDTI network or wherever it was, we're just getting connectivity to the venues. We're just getting a lot of this interesting advantage to being able to look from a broadcast center into a truck. And when you're going to then take and go 4 times the bandwidth to do that and make that, 4 times less efficient, I'm not sure that that's meeting our production goals.
Yeah, but that's the same argument that happened from SDI to high def.
Absolutely, and it took 10 years.
And so, as far as 1080p goes, I think it was an interim step, because I do think that we're going to end up with 4K. And there'll be a way to technically harness it so that we can handle it. But at this point in time, everybody's working toward that.
I think, again, it always boils down to which lens of view you're taking. I think when you look at cameras, when you look at the final output that the truck or the facility is producing, you're going to want to shoot for a nice high level. When you look at overall production workflows, I think we've seen it, and people have said it time and time again, is that a producer, when given the choice of having the best camera angle, the best cameraman, the best high frame rate for super slow motion, for example, from our lens of view, they've usually chosen the higher frame rate well over the higher resolution, because it perceptively tells a better story. So I think that all the time we've seen them make compromise in the video standard that they do for, or the bit rate or the codec, whatever they're doing, to meet a production function, regardless of maybe the final, nitpicking, engineering output.
Same thing with speed of the replay. Does the highlight package, does it get to the viewer faster? And until it's kind of at similar speeds for 4K as it is for HD or 1080p, I think we're going to be, compromise the video resolution. Mm-hmm. And it will get there. I don't disagree with you that, CPU speeds, all of these GPUs, it will get there. I just don't think it's going to be next week.
One of the fun things that I like to bring up as a topic is we're talking about IP as well as maybe a broad category on it. And now you hear us on the panel talking about 1080p, 1080i, 4K. And when we were building SDI infrastructures, you were largely at one standard. And you said, well, what's the truck built for? Or what standard is it doing for that production client? More and more now, as we get into IP, I would predict that what we're going to start hearing more and more is, well, the cameras are in 4K, the replays are 1080p, I have other feeds that are 1080i, I have something else that's 8K, I have other things that are maybe even a standard to yet be said out loud, but we might start seeing a wide mix of formats because IP can enable it. So I think that's where it's going to offer its own challenges. It may offer its own rewards when I look at production space, but for sure IP is the enabler in that kind of a category.
It's a tool that allows us to do these things that we want to do.
And we just started touching on all that because, now with the higher frame rates and everything else, we're dealing with more resources being used to actually stay where we were.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now you're talking temporal besides resolution. So yeah, it's a mixture of everything in one fabric. So I think that production tools have to evolve to the level of how do you tell the story knowing that you have lots of mixes of formats and content that you can bring in, and all the producer and director want to do is use them well in the production. So I think the tools have to be built to echo that reality.
Mm-hmm. I guess the, we'll close out here, but, UHD and HDR, give me the business model, and I'm sure that people would do it, but there is not really a business model there. There's not a good case there.
Not yet.
Not yet, exactly. So, great. Well, thanks, guys, for your time. You had a hard turnover?